This is the Wide Format Impressions broadcast.
There's a knowledge crisis in the printing industry. As the older press operators and experts age out, they take their knowledge and their expertise with them. But don't worry, there is a way to fix it. I'm Gabby Hauk, your host for today's episode of the broadcast, and joining me today is Amy Servi-Bonner, Vice President of Printing AI. Amy, thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
So, in your article, you highlight a knowledge crisis when it comes to AI. Can you expand a little more on this and exactly what that entails?
Sure. What we're seeing is that there definitely is a knowledge crisis right now, and what I mean by that is the crisis isn't AI capability. It's that AI has nothing to learn from in a lot of the print and packaging organizations that we're working with. So, roughly 70 to 80% of how a print shop packaging organization runs lives in someone's head. So it's undocumented judgment, it's, tribal knowledge, tribal patterns for that matter. So when people who hold it retire, move on, win the lottery, all of the things, the shop is actually losing its operating intelligence. And unfortunately, AI can't really rescue you from that if there's no institutional knowledge to train on. So that's what I mean by the knowledge crisis.
Of course. And with the average age of, skilled technical professionals in our industry climbing, also paired with that fact that you just said that 60 to 80% it's in someone's head and it's not necessarily documented,
Mhm.
how can we make sure we still carry on this knowledge of people who are leaving the industry?
Well, that's kind of what I touched on both in the article and at the Inkjet Summit just recently. I did a presentation to the attendees there about knowledge sovereignty,
Mhm.
and how important it is for them to be in a position where if they know or have a sense or even not, just can look at somebody that's important to them. Doesn't mean they're the highest paying individual. It means, if that person were to call them, let's say tomorrow, and say, my last day is Monday, you know, would their stomach sink? And if so, then that person or that role, the information that that person handles, again, mostly judgment type stuff, not hard data that they're entering into a system, they need to get ahead of that. And so, I explained that there's three things that you don't, there's three ways you can go at this. So you can get ahead of it. You can be at the point where someone tells you that they're ready to leave or, gives you a time frame. And you can try to get, this information from them, but you never want to be in a position where they've already walked out the door and you've got nothing. So capturing that information, we have a way through printing AI to be able to do that and help people with that, using AI. So, capturing decisions, making sure that people understand why something happens more than what it is that happens. Sitting with your senior people, like I said, getting close to those guys or those people to make sure that they understand, the value of those folks on the shop floor or in your estimating department or your customer service area. Record them walking through how they made their last three hard decisions. That's the asset right there, and then encode that so the next person, or for that matter, AI, can replay that reasoning.
Mhm. You also mentioned in your article that the knowledge crisis doesn't necessarily just stop at press room doors. How does this kind of affect
Yeah.
the entire value chain?
So, it's a handoff problem. So, let's say an estimator quotes something wrong, a scheduler can't recover, a CSR overpromises something, and pre-press catches something too late, customer service then eats the margin. So every link in the chain depends on judgment that, like I say, was never written down.
Speaking of judgment, you also make a distinction between generic AI tools and what you call AI employees. Can you touch
Yeah.
a little bit more on that and how should leaders in business think differently about those two concepts?
So if you think about it, the most kind of rudimentary tool that most people use is ChatGPT. So anyone can use it for anything. Um, the difference there is that, if you walk up and you just ask, you prompt, a tool like ChatGPT with a question or, some sort of, reasoning prompt, they're just going to give you information back, but they're not necessarily learning or being trained on the decisions that, your business is making, or for that matter, even from a personal perspective. An AI employee has a role on the org chart with a baseline metric and an override owner. So, for example, you know, if you're if for the one that I showed at the Inkjet Summit was there were actually two AI employees that I demonstrated. One was in estimating, and one was a production manager. And both of those AI employees had been trained by employees who had been with that organization for 22 years. That was the demonstration.
Wow.
And the junior estimator who prompted them with a specification, asked the question at the end of that prompt and said, or that conversation, and said, "What should I be thinking about?" And almost immediately, the AI agent or the AI employee came back and said, you know, there's all kinds of things you need to be thinking about. They knew the customer, they knew the brand manager, they knew, what their preferences were. Again, where would that ever be written down? So it's the employee is trained on your shop, capitalizing your decisions, your history. You don't ask, what can ChatGPT do for us? You ask, what job am I hiring this AI employee to do, and who owns its performance review? Again, there's different ways for people to go at, how they leverage AI. There's full outsourcing to AI. There's governed AI, which is, human in the loop. And then there's things that people would never put into AI unless, that AI environment was sitting on their infrastructure behind, their security, and that they owned the IP. So, there's a lot to this, but that AI employee should be sovereign, and it should be specific to that, to people's roles and to that organization.
Of course. And obviously, there's always going to be skeptics in the industry, and some people fear that AI will replace human expertise. But your argument in this article almost suggests the opposite.
Yeah.
And AI is kind of the only way to preserve human expertise. How do you respond to the skeptics that, think that AI is taking over and replacing people?
Well, like I explained in at Inkjet, I keep going back to that because that was the last presentation that I did. That question was asked, and I responded, very transparently, and said, there's a lot of psychology that goes into, anybody getting involved with AI, not just people like myself who consult and provide strategy and development resources, but even for those from a leadership perspective, or people that are advocating internally at an organization about the use of AI. The one thing that people have to understand is, the 30 years, let's say, or 40, whatever the number is, of pattern recognition in your senior estimator's head only outlives their tenure if it's written down, if it's encoded. Otherwise, it walks out the door on their last Friday. And AI isn't replacing that expert. It's the only way the expert's expertise survives them. So skeptics are arguing for a future where the knowledge dies, and I'm arguing for one where it compounds. So that's why I'm saying, I'm advocating differently. I'm arguing differently for this.
Of course. And for maybe a print business that wants to start, archiving some of this stuff, maybe they read your article, they feel inspired, and they want to start doing this immediately. What's one immediate action they can take? How can printing AI help them? What tools should they use? What should they start doing?
So again, I said to the audience at Inkjet, one thing that they needed to do that the next week was to go identify the single most dangerous knowledge holder in their organization. And in a lot of cases, that might be them. That might have been that owner, the operator, the principal, the fourth, fifth generation family member who's now in charge of an organization. So they need to identify either themselves or whoever that person is. The person whose absence would break something on a Monday morning if they didn't show up, and put 60 minutes on the calendar. Ask them to walk through how they made their last 3 hardest decisions, record it, And that's really kind of day one of protecting the intelligence inside their company.
Printing United Expo is where the entire printing industry unites under one roof. Explore cutting-edge technology from over 800 exhibitors, see live product demonstrations, and discover solutions that can transform your business. With exclusive education sessions, expert insights, and endless networking opportunities, this is the must-attend event for anyone in print. No matter your role, Printing United Expo delivers the innovation, connections, and knowledge to help you stay ahead. Join us this October 22nd to 24th in Orlando. Learn more at printunited.com and experience the future of print today.
And do you think with these tools, we can kind of help solve this, turn it less into a knowledge crisis and make it not a crisis anymore? Are you hopeful that we will be able to, I'm trying to find a way to answer this, to ask this question. Sorry. Bear with me, Amy.
Yeah.
My brain's like working on like 10% today. Are you hopeful that in the future this will become less of a crisis, essentially?
Yeah. And I think that it's just a matter of people being comfortable giving, giving that information away. That's one thing. Having a methodology to be able to do that. And that's one of the things that printing AI can help with. Again, when I did the talk at Inkjet, we were featuring, how we go at this. And there's an engagement that we offer. It's called a knowledge audit. And what we're really looking for is, sovereign intelligence, sovereign knowledge that's again specific to that organization. And we can help capture that information. We have an entire approach that's that makes that possible. I've been on calls all week with people that were either at that summit or have read the article or, have been referred to us. And everyone's very intrigued by, how do you do this? Like, what is it that you guys do that, makes this possible? And as I explain it to them, they're all in. They can't believe that, this isn't something that they had ever thought about doing before. So I think, again, once people start to get comfortable getting this information down on paper or in some semblance of, a system organized, however you want to look at it, then it'll become less of a crisis. But, the one thing I would hate is for people to wait till the retirement party of somebody and or treating it as an IT project instead of an operational discipline. Again, capturing procedures instead of judgment is not the same. I've had people say, even just yesterday, well, so we have standard operating procedures that, that would help, right? Well, yeah, that helps, but that's not the same as somebody making a judgment call, on a shop floor about swapping out a substrate or switching machines because they know something's going to run better, faster, have better margin, et cetera. Those are judgment calls. Or for that matter, taking a job that they shouldn't take because, even though it doesn't meet all the criteria and maybe, you have to outsource it, but for that customer, that matters to them, So these are things that you're not going to have that information in any ERP or MIS system. And it's definitely not going to be in any standard operating procedure or, manual that anybody's put together. So, the one thing that what I call the capture window right now is where we all should be focused, is, no identified successor in the room is probably one of the biggest issues we're going to have. So, again, back to that exercise, what's the next action someone can take is to find that person, that's the most dangerous knowledge holder and get involved and start capturing that information. And that knowledge transfer needs a place to receive. It doesn't just need to be recorded. So that's again how printing AI can help.
Of course. And how do you guys how can you address people maybe not feeling comfortable sharing some of this knowledge? Because obviously not everyone wants to share their secret sauce sometimes. They want to keep it close to their chest. So how can you address them feeling comfortable sharing it, encrypting it, getting it in AI? And
also with that too, concerns of like cybersecurity or anything like that? How can you kind of address those concerns?
And they all come up. I had a client yesterday, or prospective client, ask us, so we have to open our entire database to you guys? The answer is no. What we do is, um, we work through in read-only access to certain people, to certain databases that we would be given access to. But really, what I said to somebody yesterday was, we're not there to try and replace, again, back to the argument. We're not trying to replace somebody. We're trying to get somebody to co-author what they do every day. So I don't really even need, yes, I need access to certain pieces of information if that's where that information resides. But most often, you know, talking to a human being has nothing to do with cyber, so I should be able to negate that discussion or that concern. Um, and again, not everybody wants to give their information. And I've heard arguments about, well, does that information um, belong to the human being or does it belong to the company? Well, it's both, and I think that people need to understand that. And I've had some organizations where individuals have flat out said, I am not talking to you. So, that's again where the psychology comes into play, and ensuring them, trying to ensure and assure them that, we're not here to do anything but to try to understand how to protect the role you have, said person. Because in the case that you go and win the lottery, this job has to continue. This decision-making logic has to remain with the company because, what you've done works, and it's helped the company grow. It's helped the company scale. It's helped the company improve margins and, all those things. So, um, communication obviously is mission critical here, but, um, you know, we have to collaborate through this process with everybody, in the decision-making, uh, along the decision-making chain.
Of course. And Amy, that was actually about all of my questions. Is there anything else you would like to add on this knowledge crisis or anything like that? Is there any other points you really want to just drive home?
Well, I think that it's interesting for a lot of companies that, as I mentioned before, it's the decision-making patterns that are embedded in how these shops run, how a day-to-day organization looks, whether it's an estimator pricing a tricky substrate or a scheduler sequencing when a press goes down, a CSR flagging a job that's about to go sideways. Uh, print is harder because every job in most cases is custom. So substrate, ink, press, finishing, all those variables, no two shops standardize the same way. So the DNA of an organization is really in the hands of the people who are, taking a job, like I've always said, from quote to cash. So, we recognize this. Again, we're here to help. And, hopefully people understand what printing AI is. We're, the first AI consultancy in the industry. And, we've got multiple ways to help people through the AI journey. Again, starting with a knowledge audit, starting with an AI opportunity sprint, and, all the way through to the development of an AI application. We're here for them. We're part of the alliance. And, we're priced well. We're not, out for the consulting grab, and we'll go as slow or fast as people want to. It's really just about being here to make sure that the industry doesn't get left behind.
Amazing. I always love asking that question. It always gets great answers. All right. Well, Amy, thank
Yeah.
you so much for joining me today. I really
Oh, my
appreciate you coming
pleasure.
on the podcast, and we will chat soon.
All right. Thanks for having me.
You've been listening to the Wide Format Impressions broadcast. You can find more great content at wideformatimpressions.com.